Hi, everyone. Here is our day 17 Ed puzzle. Welcome. So here we have our story of God and Machloket in the early narratives of the Torah. Right, we've done this. We went over this in class as well, and I just want to ask the following question before we kind of close out officially on this unit. So there are some general ideas I think we can say about machloket at this point for early parts of the Torah, and I think it's important to kind of understand this as we move forward because we're going to see something very different as we move forward into the next two stories. We're going to see specifically in the story of Korach that the idea of machloket has now not only come about, but is actually nuanced as well, meaning that we get this idea of not just machloket, but the possibility of machloket being she'eno l'shem shamayim and l'shem shamayim, right? The possibility of machloket being for the sake of heaven and not for the sake of heaven. So the question is, well, does that mean that before that point, was there any concept of machloket at all? Was it defined at all? Or was there just machloket l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven, disagreements for the sake of heaven, and only when we get to Korach do we get a machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim? But before we get there, I want to first refocus on these questions for one last time, because um, we get kind of a sense, at least in the very beginning of the Torah, from these stories, that there is such a thing as disagreement, but it's actually not necessarily a bad thing. That every machloket is not automatically a machloket shelo l'shem shamayim. That there are some machloket that is allowed, and some machloket that, well, let me just ask you this. What is our proof from some of these stories, and just give me one or two proofs that machloket is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, where are the proofs for that in any of the stories that you found? And then, what is our proof, number two, that according to the Torah, the opposite of machloket was considered and then actually discarded as a possible solution, right? If machloket means disagreement and argument, there is an opposite to that. And it's not machloket lo l'shem shamayim. It's the opposite of machloket it's not the opposite of machloket l'shem shamayim. It's the opposite of machloket in general. And so how do we have proof that actually the opposite, right? Considering possibility a world where no machloket existed, that was actually considered, and then it was rejected, meaning saying, no, that's actually not going to work as well. And then number three, what's our proof that the Bible asks us to relook at a story that seems to show obedience as an ideal and asks us to consider the possibility of using a different way of acting? So what's the, even where we see that obedience might be really the opposite of machloket, might be an ideal, what's the proof that maybe that story gets reconsidered in another part of the Bible? All right, let's move on. So now here we are, and I guess I kind of mentioned this before. So, what significantly has changed about the concept of machloket from the beginning of the Torah up to this point? Right now, we have this kind of nuance. Right, we don't just have this idea of machloket. Machloket is being named. Right, we're calling machloket something, a category called machloket, and under that category, we have a sense of there can be a good machloket and there can be a bad machloket. Right, in the beginning of the Torah, all we got was this sense of there's this thing called, arguing with God or disagreeing, or there's this thing called God kind of allowing for the possibility of disagreement and God being in many ways okay with that. We didn't necessarily call it machloket, but here we're actually calling it that. And then we're actually defining the story of Korach as the paradigm, the example of machloket lo l'shem shamayim, an argument for the wrong reason. Now, again, so here's a question for you. is, do you think, is that because there was never such an idea of machloket lo l'shem shamayim until we get to Korach? Or is it that there are many examples, but for some reason, like Korach is our best example, or our clearest example, or our purest example of that kind of that kind of argument, an argument that's completely for the wrong reasons, right? Okay. So I'd like you to kind of take a stab. Of course, it's going to be hard to kind of answer this question since you don't necessarily know all those stories. But I think the sense of if it's being defined here, does it mean it never happened before? Or is defined here meaning like this is the best example of which? So which one do you think that might be? And maybe a way to prove your point is to say, what are other examples of when you see something standing as a definition? Is that because that's the definition and nothing else has that same definition? Or are there many things that have that same definition and this is the one that kind of, this is a nice example of it, right? Even though there could be many others. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Okay. So we have a big question to consider as we read the story of Korach. If this story creates the definition of what is a machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim, a disagreement that's not for the sake of heaven, then what are Korach's actions that help us create the machloket definition? Meaning, one of the things we're going to have to do as we read the story of Korach is ask, what are his actions? If those are the actions that cause machloket lo l'shem shamayim, she'eno l'shem shamayim, what are those actions? And number two is, at what point is a machloket pushed to the point of it getting to a machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim level? Is it one specific act that pushes it to this point, or is it a series of small acts that build up until there's a threshold has been crossed? So I actually made two definitions to try to help understand this, right? So graph number one shows that there's this single act that pushes something from the low l'shem shamayim level, from the l'shem shamayim level, and then up that act is done automatically. Now it's become this one act changes it, or is it a series of small acts that maybe if we didn't do every one of those acts, it could stay in the realm of low l'shem shamayim, of l'shem shamayim, and only when it reaches that level, like a series of small acts. So I guess I want to hear kind of your thought, your hypothesis. Do you think something that changes something from being machloket low l'shem shemaim to low l'shem shemaim is like a single act? There's a single thing that changes actions from good to bad, or are there small little things that slowly, slowly, slowly turn it, and all of a sudden we find it to be in the definition of, hey, that's a bad thing and not a good thing. So I'd love your idea about that. All right. Um, and what? So, and here's my other question. Let me just kind of turn the case. Which graph gives us a possibility that even in acts that we define as a machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim, a disagreement not for the sake of heaven, that there might still be some elements of machloket l'shem shamayim in it, right? So I think that's an important thing to understand. Is there one of these graphs that does, or if you think they both do, please make the case for that, right? So is it graph number one and Y, or is it graph number two and Y, or is it both graphs do that in Y? And again, the question is, even in the graphs where we see eventually the line getting to a place of machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim, which we're trying not to do, even in there, are there elements within those machlokets, those disagreements of l'shem shamayim? And this is going to be important because really we're asking is, even in the times when we see, hey, that person has kind of espoused an argument that is not for the sake of heaven, maybe there are still kernels of truth within it that are for the sake of heaven, right? But something changes it from the good to the bad. So again, make your case. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Great. Um, and now we're going to move, and then one final kind of theoretical question before we move into the stories themselves. Why isn't it? I told you we're going to investigate two stories. The first is the golden calf story, and the second is the Korach story. And one thing we need to know right off the bat that's really interesting is that the poster child for Machloket She'eno L'Shem Shamayim is the Korach story in Bamidbar. But we know that there was an equally pretty disastrous story in the book of Shemot around the golden calf. And so my question to you is, why isn't that our poster child for being a machloket she'eno l'shem shemayim? Why isn't that? And I just want to, before we answer that question, I just want to go through a quick review of that story, the golden calf, some context and summary. So here we go. The children of Israel arrive at the foot of Mount Sinai and prepare to see, hear, and listen to God with thunder, lightning, and shofar blast. All the people that are present look on as God makes himself and the Ten Commandments most important, and his Ten Commandments, the most important commandments that are known to his people. Number two. People are just amazed by what they've witnessed. They're afraid that if they hear, see, and listen to any more, they will die. They ask Moshe to speak to God for them and for Moshe to be the middleman. Moshe agrees and goes up to Mount Sinai to get the Torah from God. Next, while Moshe remains on Mount Sinai, the people below are becoming scared and worried that Moshe will never return. They want a symbol of God that they can see and touch. Aaron is pressured to create a golden calf. God informs Moshe what is happening below, and he threatens to wipe out the entire nation. Moshe begs that the people be spared. God agrees to Moshe's request, and then Moshe returns to the camp in order to restore order. However, as Moshe approaches the camp, he is so angered by the sight and sounds of the dancing that he smashes the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, that he's brought from God. Moshe melts the golden calf and grinds it into a powder. Moshe then pours this powder into a stream and forces all the people to drink from it. The people declare that they are sorry. After that, after the golden calf incident, God tells Moshe to climb up to Mount Sinai once again so that he can receive a new set of the Ten Commandments. Next, Moshe asks to see God's face. Instead, God shows Moshe his back. God also shows Moshe that he is a God of mercy, kindness, and truth, by which he guides the Israelites. Moshe returns to the camp after another 40 days. Next, after Moshe comes down from Mount Sinai with the second set of tablets, he informs the people that God wants them to build a movable house for God to dwell in. So I guess my question is this. So this is the story of the golden calf. Is this also a story of machloket she'eno l'shem shemayim, a machloket not for the sake of heaven? And I'm asking that question because we see that it didn't become kind of the paradigmatic, the poster child story. And I guess my question is why? So see if we can find some elements of this that say, well, actually, maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. What might be those things that we might want to investigate further that might give us a hint that maybe this is a pretty bad story, but maybe it's not actually the worst story of disagreement in the Torah. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing for, I'm going to give you some context and summary of the Korach story, and then we'll look at it really specifically. So here we go. After almost a year after their departure from Egypt, all of the parts of God's movable house were finally finished. And Moshe supervises as everything is put together and arranged in the Mishkan, that's God's house. A cloud filled with God's glory immediately covers the Mishkan, that's God's house, and indicates that God's very pleased with the work that has been completed. This cloud will now act as a guide for the Israelite people while they are in the wilderness. When the cloud lifts, it's a signal that the Israelites need to break camp and continue on their journey. So the Israelites were once slaves, they are now free, and they're about a year outside of Egypt. At God's command, Moshe sends 12 spies, one from each tribe, to scout the land of Canaan and to report back to the land. They need to report back about who lives there, how strong their houses are, and what types of food can be grown in the land. These spies return after 40 days with evidence that the land can grow wonderful food. However, they also return with stories about how the people of Canaan are mighty and that they live in well-defended cities. 10 of the spies were pessimistic about the Israelite attempt to take over the land. But Caleb and Joshua were optimistic. They urged quick military action. The people decide to listen to the majority of the spies and become so panicked and upset that they want to appoint a new leader and return to Egypt right now. That's actually a story of rebellion in itself that we probably could be looking at in this class. God was furious with the way the Israelites acted. Their decision not to enter the land showed how a lack of faith in God showed a lack of faith in God and in themselves. God wants to destroy the entire Israelite people, but Moshe pleads with God not to do it. God tells Moshe the Israelites will wander now for 40 years, and 1 year for every day the spies were kind of touring the land, until all the people presently over the age of 20 die. Only Caleb and Joshua will be allowed to enter the promised land because they were the only ones who spoke well about the land of Canaan. The 10 spies who gave the negative report about the land are then killed by a plague. 10, the number 10, I've heard that number before. Where have I heard that number in what we have studied so far? Something very important about the number 10. Here we see the number of 10 being an influential group, influencing all the Israelites not to enter the land. Where have we seen that number before? And how do we know that that is the smallest influential group? Okay. Finally, back to our story, Korach tries to start a rebellion against Moshe. At a big showdown between these two men, the ground opens up and swallows Korach and all of his followers. So I gave a little bit of the story away, but I have a feeling many of you knew the story already. But so we're asking the question just to kind of make a larger hypothesis right now of why is it that you believe this story gets the title of the definition of, like, if we look up machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim, a disagreement not for the sake of heaven, we look it up and we say, and it says Korach, see Korach, and we would see that story. And why don't we be able to open up a dictionary and say machloket l'shem shamayim, see golden calf incident? All right, what is it about this story that you think is that makes this the machloket she'eno l'shem shamayim and not the other story? Okay, so that's my question right now. And of course, these don't have to be right, but I'm looking for thoughtful answers because I'm looking for you to compare at least what you know right now about the Korach story from this summary with what you learned a few moments ago from this summary about the golden calf incident. So best of luck with that. And now we really get started with our story. So let's begin. Okay. Um, let's read together. Now Korach, son of Izhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi, took Datan and Aviram, son of Eliab, and On, son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moshe, together with 250 Israelites, heads of the community, chosen in the assembly, men with names. They combined against Moshe and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself above God's congregation?" When Moshe heard this, he fell on his face, or maybe his face fell, one of those two. All right. So the first question is this one. Korach's group are related to Levi. Natan and Aviram and On are descendants of the tribe of Reuben. Knowing who they descend from gives us an understanding of what they might just be complaining about. So let's first start by asking the question of who is Korach. Korach is son of Izhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi. Okay. Now, by the way, we know someone already who's the son of Levi. The son of another Levite is Moshe and Aaron. So look what we know about Levites in general. The tribe of Levite or of Levi served particular religious duties for the Israelites. The Kohanim were a smaller group that also came from the tribe of Levi. However, the Kohanim are all direct descendants of Aaron, Moshe's brother. The Levites were basically the helpers of the Kohanim. As you see from above, Korach is a Levite. Aaron, the high priest, is a Kohen, but he is also a Levite. So my question to you is, knowing this information, what might Korach actually want? What might be his motivation for rebellion? What is he looking for that he doesn't have right now? What is he upset about? And let's go to this question. Now we're looking at these Natan, at Aviram, Datan, and On. They are all descendants of Reuben. And just look for a second. Here are all the 12 sons of Jacob that make up the 12 tribes of Israel, from the firstborn to the lastborn. And look at Reuben and Moshe, by the way, Moshe's father is from the tribe of Levi. So what is it that descendants of the Reubenites might be upset about, or might want that they don't actually have right now? Okay. So check out what Robert Alter, in his book, in his translation of the Five Books of Moshe, says. Two rebellions have been combined in this story: a rebellion of the Levites for priestly privileges, and a rebellion of the Reubenites for political power. It is fitting that the latter should come out of the tribe of Reuben, since Reuben is the firstborn who has been passed over. So here we see what Robert Alter brings up, which I hope you may have discovered, is that here we have Korach, who is basically saying, I can't believe that this guy Moshe, who's just like me, how he has so much power, right? I'm sorry, it's not that. He's saying, I can't believe that this guy Aaron, who's also a Levite, just like me, is the head of our religious functions. He's the high priest. But I'm a Levite also. How come Aaron got the job? I think I should get the job. And then we have the Reubenites, the people who are connected to Reubenites, saying, I can't believe it. Moshe is a Levite, but I'm the firstborn. I'm a Reubenite. How come we don't get the power that Moshe has? So all of a sudden, you have Korach wanting the power of whom? And what is that? And you have the Reubenites wanting the power of whom? And what is that? Right? And so they come together. So I want you to create your own midrash answering the following question: how did these two groups, the Reubenites, the Korach, and the Reubenites, come together against Moshe? So write the story, write a brief story in 3 or 4 sentences about how Korach comes to convince this group of being part of the rebellion that he is planning. Okay. Question number 2. Now let's read actually the what it is. So we have a sense of why Korach is upset. He wants to be the high priest, or he wants to be a priest. He wants to be a Kohen, and he's just a Levite. But now let's look at what his main complaint is, right? What is it in here, right? Read the text itself. You have gone too far. For all the community is holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself above the congregation? What is it that Korach is really upset about? Okay, but wait a second. This is weird, because check back in book number 2 in Exodus, it says something that contradicts or actually not contradicts, but supports what Korach is saying. See, Korach's claim can't be that false, because look what the Torah says right here. So read and tell me the words that kind of support Korach's claim that all the community are holy and God is in their midst. Why are you making yourself, Moshe and Aaron, special and different than everyone else? Because what is Korach saying here? Right? What are the words that are the important ones that make us think, well, actually, you know what? Korach's got a point. God did say this. So, um, so is Korach actually wrong or not? Let's kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into these. These all come from Safaria, where I looked up the words for all the community are holy, all of them, and I kind of want to say, what did different people have to say about that? So what I'd like you to do is I'd like to look at each one of them, and your final task of the day is to kind of be the responder to these complaints. Okay, think about what the complaints are, and the complaints are based right, and then how, if you're the voice of Moshe and Aaron, how would you respond, right? So if I am, for example, if I am saying, if for all the community are holy, all of them, if I think that actually means that look, we all get to eat of the manna, and the manna is the food of God. If the manna is making you holy, it's making us holy. So since we're all eating the manna, we should all be holy. and then Moshe could respond and say, actually, but God gives you exactly the amount of manna that you need, and the amount of manna that Aaron and I need is much larger than yours. You just don't notice that, or something like that. That's just like an example. Okay, but here we go for the real thing. Okay, so here we go. So here's what Chibat Yetera says. For all the community are holy, all of that means God is within each and every one of us. There's no need for your leadership, Moshe, at all. We can do this all better ourselves. So imagine if you're Moshe or Aaron, how would you respond to this saying, actually, you're not correct? Okay. Let's go to Orach Chaim. Moshe and Aaron, you've taken too much authority upon yourself. This entire congregation was holy because we experienced direct communication from God. This was something that was not granted to any other nation. But now, Moshe and Aaron, you've placed yourself above this holy nation. So now, if you're Moshe or Aaron, how would you respond to that and saying, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong? Okay, and Sforno says this is what Korach is saying. Moshe, every single person in this congregation is 100% holy from head to toe. Just like you two, we are the exact same as you are. If you're Aaron or Moshe, how would you respond? Okay, next one comes from Chizkuni. Every family has a holy person among them. This is the firstborn of that family. That firstborn child has special privileges. And before the Levites took over the role, it was the firstborn child that needed to serve God in God's house. This is what Chizkuni says, but he's pointing out something that's very, very interesting that I want to make sure all of you know. That at the time when the Israelites are freed from Egypt, right? God says something to the people and says, guys, you need to be very thankful that I freed you from Egypt. But actually, there's one person from each family that needs to offer me an extra thank you. And who is that? Well, who is that? It's the firstborn. Why? Because they should have died during the 10 plagues, but they don't die. And because they didn't die, they don't have a thank you just to be saved from the plagues like everyone else, but they have that extra thank you of being saved from the plague where they should have died because they were the firstborn. And so God says, you know what? As a you're welcome, or as an extra thank you, this is what I'd like you to do. I want you to be the heads of my religion. I want the oldest person in each house to come when I build kind of the great big synagogue. I want you to be the workers of that synagogue. Now, at some point, and I don't quite understand why, and it's possibly because of the sin of the golden calf, at some point the tables turn and God changes God's mind about having all the firstborn come and be the leaders of the religion. At that point God says, you know what, actually I do not want the firstborn of every family to be the leader of my religion. I would rather have one group, and that's the Levites, and the subset of Levites being the Kohanes. So God changes the rules around. And by the way, it's very interesting that so God kind of manipulates. There was a hierarchy in a family, really the oldest person being the one who goes and serves God. But and that obviously recalls for us, we just studied all those early stories about kind of hierarchy, lack of hierarchy, God trying to manipulate and get rid of hierarchies, but does he? But so here we see that there was this sense of hierarchy. God gets rid of it and says, okay, I'm just making one group. All of you guys, everyone in your family in that group is my workers in the temple. So this is what Chizkuni says. Again, his comment is, every family has a holy person among them. That's the firstborn of that family. The firstborn had special privileges, and before the Levites took over the role of being the heads of our religion, those firstborn children were the ones that were the heads. So don't tell us, Moshe, that we're not holy. Each and every family had a holy member among them, and all of them were just as holy as you are. If you're Aaron or Moshe, how would you respond to that? And then our final one from the Radak. The entire congregation became holy from the day they stood at Mount Sinai, and God gave them the Torah there. So Radak is saying this is what Korach is saying. We're all holy because we were exactly where you were, Moshe and Aaron. We were standing there exactly as you were. We heard the same words you did by God. God came to us at the same moment and spoke the same thing. So if you're Moshe or Aaron, how would you respond to a Korach who said those words? All right, and that's it for the day.